When we imagine the age of piracy in the Caribbean, visions arise of tall ships silhouetted against a fiery sunset, black flags whipping in the wind, and cannons thundering across turquoise seas. Popular culture has given us images of swashbuckling rogues, hidden treasure, and sleek vessels chasing fortune and adventure. Yet behind these myths lies a reality at once harsher and more fascinating: the actual ships that carried pirates across the Caribbean during the 17th and 18th centuries. These were not always grand vessels built for piracy, but often modest ships, captured, refitted, and pressed into service by men who needed speed, maneuverability, and enough firepower to intimidate or escape. They were floating tools of survival, commerce, and defiance, shaped by the turbulent era of colonial rivalry in the New World. The story of Caribbean pirate ships is not one of a single type of vessel, but of many. Small, swift sloops ideal for coastal raids, sturdy brigantines that could handle both speed and cargo, captured merchantmen transformed into pirate flagships, and, in rare cases, even large frigates brought under the black flag. Each of these ships had its role in the great drama of piracy, and each reveals the balance between myth and truth. This is their story of how they were designed, built, armed, crewed, and ultimately remembered. From their rise in the so-called Golden Age of Piracy, through their service in raids and battles, to the way they live on in legend and popular imagination, we will explore the ships that carried the Jolly Roger and struck fear into the Caribbean seas. Historical context: the Caribbean of the 17th and early 18th centuries was a place of profound transformation and violence. Spain had claimed vast territories in the Americas, and its treasure fleets carried gold, silver, and goods from the New World back to Europe. Other European powers, England, France, and the Netherlands, sought to challenge Spanish dominance, and the seas became a theater of conflict, rivalry, and opportunity. Piracy, in its many forms, was born from this competition. At first, there were the privateers, sailors and adventurers who carried government licenses or letters of marque, permitting them to attack enemy ships during times of war. Sir Francis Drake, for example, was both celebrated as a hero in England and condemned as a pirate by Spain. These men often sailed ships similar to those of their adversaries, outfitted for raiding rather than for regular commerce. As wars ended, many privateers found themselves unemployed. Without royal commissions, they turned to outright piracy. Ships that once served the crown now served only their crews, who hunted merchantmen, raided ports, and lived outside the law. By the late 17th century, piracy had become a persistent force in the Caribbean, threatening not only Spanish galleons, but also the trade of England, France, and the Netherlands. This was the beginning of what historians call the Golden Age of Piracy, roughly spanning from the 1650s to the 1730s. During this period, pirate ships became both tools of rebellion and symbols of freedom. They offered men, and sometimes women, an escape from the rigid hierarchies of naval service or colonial life. Yet they were also dangerous workplaces, where hardship, disease, and violence were constant companions. The Caribbean provided the perfect stage for these ships. Its hundreds of islands, countless coves, and shallow waters made it an ideal hunting ground and a place to hide. Treasure fleets, merchant convoys, and supply ships plied the seas between Europe and the colonies, offering tempting prizes. And so the pirate ship, in its many forms, became the vessel of choice for men who chose, or were forced, to live by the black flag. Design and construction. Unlike the mighty warships built in European royal dockyards, pirate ships were rarely constructed with piracy in mind. Pirates did not have the luxury of state-sponsored shipbuilding programs, nor the immense resources required to commission frigates or ships of the line. Instead, they took what they could capture or purchase cheaply and reshaped these vessels into something suited for their dangerous trade: sources of pirate ships. Most pirate vessels began their lives as merchant ships or coastal traders. Some were taken as prizes during raids, swift sloops captured from local traders, or larger ships seized from merchant convoys. Others were former privateers, already fitted with stronger rigging and gun ports during times of war, that simply changed allegiance when their captains abandoned their commissions. In some cases, pirates purchased small ships outright in colonial ports, outfitting them for speed and combat. But in almost every case, the hallmark of pirate shipbuilding was improvisation. Pirates needed ships that could carry loot, intimidate their prey, and above all, escape from warships sent to hunt them. Preferred types of ships. The most common pirate vessels of the Caribbean were not great galleons, as often imagined, but smaller, more agile ships. Sloops, small, single-masted vessels with a fore and aft rig. Sloops were fast, easy to handle, and could navigate the shallow waters of the Caribbean where larger warships dared not follow. They could carry up to 75 men and mount several small cannon. Many of the most famous pirate captains, including Blackbeard, used sloops for raids and quick strikes. Brigantines, two-masted ships with both square and fore and aft sails, offering a balance of speed and cargo capacity. Brigantines were favored for longer voyages or when a larger crew was needed. They could mount heavier guns than a sloop while still being nimble in coastal waters. Captured merchantmen. Larger ships, like French or Spanish merchant galleons, were occasionally taken and converted into pirate flagships. Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge was originally a French slave ship, La Concorde, which he captured and refitted with additional cannon. Frigates. Rarely, pirates commanded frigates, light warships already built for speed and power. These were usually captured from enemy navies or taken from privateers. Because of their size, frigates required large crews and were harder to maintain, but in the hands of a determined captain, they could dominate the seas. Modifications and refitting. Once a ship came into pirate hands, it was almost always modified. Heavy cargo holds might be stripped out to make room for men and arms. Gun ports were cut into the sides to mount additional cannon. Rigging was strengthened to carry more sail, increasing speed. Above all, pirates prized maneuverability and intimidation. A ship might not be able to defeat a navy frigate in battle, but if it could catch merchantmen and escape pursuing warships, it was valuable. Pirates also often hoisted false flags to disguise their approach. Only at the last moment would the dreaded black flag, the Jolly Roger, be unfurled. Construction in the colonies. The Caribbean itself provided shipyards where captured vessels could be repaired and altered. Islands such as New Providence in the Bahamas, Tortuga off the coast of Hispaniola, and Port Royal in Jamaica became infamous pirate havens. In these places, ships were patched, armed, and launched back into the sea under new command. Shipwrights and carpenters, sometimes sympathetic to pirate crews, or simply motivated by payment, played their part in keeping these vessels seaworthy. Materials were often scavenged or stolen, and repairs were done quickly, reflecting the pirates' need to stay mobile and elusive. A ship for every captain. Each pirate captain had his own vision of the perfect ship. Some sought the swiftest sloop, able to dart among islands like a seabird. Others dreamed of commanding a powerful frigate bristling with cannon, a floating fortress that could cow entire convoys. Whatever the choice, the pirate ship was always a reflection of its captain's ambition, shaped by the opportunities and dangers of the Caribbean world. Technical characteristics. Pirate ships of the Caribbean were not uniform, but certain features made them especially suited to their trade. They were chosen, refitted, and manned with very specific goals in mind: speed, intimidation, and practicality. Size and dimensions. Most pirate vessels were relatively small compared to the mighty galleons and ships of the line of European navies. A typical pirate sloop might measure 50 to 70 feet in length, with a beam of around 20 feet. These compact ships could slip into shallow waters and narrow coves, places where naval pursuers dared not follow. Brigantines and larger vessels, sometimes extending to 100 feet or more, offered more space for loot and a bigger crew, but remained far smaller than the colossal treasure galleons. Their size was an advantage, too small to present a large target, but big enough to overwhelm merchant ships. Speed and maneuverability. Speed was the lifeblood of piracy. A slow ship was a doomed ship. With shallow drafts and broad rigging, sloops and brigantines could achieve top speeds of 10 to 11 knots, faster than most heavily laden merchantmen. Their agility allowed them to tack against the wind and weave among islands, while larger naval ships lumbered in pursuit. This swiftness made them ideal for hit-and-run tactics, rushing in on unsuspecting merchants, unleashing a few volleys, and boarding before the enemy could organize a defense. Armament pirate ships were floating arsenals. Though not as heavily armed as warships, they carried just enough firepower to terrify opponents. Cannon. A typical sloop might mount 4 to 12 small cannons, while a brigantine could carry up to 20 medium guns. These were often demi-culverins or sakers, lighter pieces that could still tear through wooden hulls. Large flagships like Queen Anne's Revenge boasted up to 40 guns, making them formidable even against small naval vessels. Swivel guns, lightweight, pivoting cannon mounted on the rails, used to spray grape shot or chain shot at close range. Perfect for sweeping decks and discouraging resistance. Small arms, pistols, muskets, cutlasses, and boarding axes were essential. Pirates relied less on long-range gunnery and more on the brutal, chaotic violence of boarding actions. Crew size and organization. Pirate ships carried larger crews than merchantmen of similar size. A merchant sloop might need only 20 men to sail efficiently, but pirates often packed 70 or more aboard the same vessel. The reasons were clear: to overwhelm targets during boarding, to provide replacements for casualties, to share the burden of hard labor at sea. Life aboard was crowded, noisy, and often unsanitary, but the large crew gave pirates their edge. It also reflected their democratic spirit. Shares of plunder were divided widely, and every man had a voice in matters of consequence. Innovations and modifications. Pirates were practical innovators. They modified their ships for maximum efficiency in raids, removing heavy cargo decks to make room for men and arms, cutting new gun ports to mount extra cannon, strengthening masts and rigging for more sail, painting hulls dark to blend with night seas. Many ships also carried multiple flags, Spanish, French, English, or Dutch, to disguise themselves until the moment of attack. The black flag, or Jolly Roger, was often raised only at the last instant, a chilling announcement that no mercy would be given unless surrender came swiftly. Life on board. A pirate ship was both a weapon and a home. Crews slept in hammocks or on deck with little privacy. Food was hardtack, salted meat, beans, and whatever could be seized from prizes. Water quickly went stale, rum was plentiful, and discipline was far looser than on navy ships. Yet there was a fierce sense of equality. Captains were elected, not appointed, and could be deposed if unpopular. Spoils were divided according to pre-agreed articles, with captains and officers receiving larger shares but never monopolizing the wealth. The pirate ship was thus not only a vessel of war, but also a fragile floating society, chaotic, rough, yet bound together by necessity and mutual dependence. Hunting grounds of the Caribbean pirate ships thrived in the warm waters of the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic approaches. The geography itself favored them. Countless islands, hidden inlets, and shallow reefs provided hiding places and ambush points. Merchant ships sailing between Europe, Africa, and the Americas passed through these waters carrying sugar, tobacco, spices, gold, and silver. Pirates learned to stalk the sea lanes, A sloop might drift lazily with its sails slack until a prize came near, then suddenly explode into motion, hoisting full sail and racing down upon its victim. Brigantines and larger ships prowled further offshore, waiting for treasure fleets or slower, heavily laden merchants. Raiding merchantmen. Most pirate expeditions targeted merchant vessels. These ships were often undermanned, their crews too small to resist. A pirate ship with twice or three times the manpower could quickly close the distance, fire a warning broadside, and then board. Once aboard, pirates sought plunder, gold and silver, but also food, liquor, cloth, weapons, and even medical supplies. Sometimes they took the entire ship, adding it to their fleet. At other times they stripped it bare and set it adrift. The threat of violence was often enough. Merchants who surrendered quickly were often spared. Those who resisted could expect brutal treatment. Attacks on ports and settlements. Pirate ships did not limit themselves to sea battles. Crews sometimes descended on coastal towns, raiding warehouses and plantations. The French buccaneers of Tortuga, for instance, were notorious for striking at Spanish settlements in Hispaniola and Cuba. Ships would land under cover of night, disgorge dozens of armed men, and vanish before colonial militias could respond. The most audacious captains, like Henry Morgan, even launched full-scale expeditions, leading fleets of pirate ships to attack major cities such as Portobello and Panama. These operations required coordination and boldness, but the rewards could be immense. Encounters with navies. Though pirate ships excelled at raiding merchants, they lived in fear of naval patrols. Spanish galleons, English frigates, and French warships all hunted them relentlessly. A single naval frigate with heavier guns and disciplined crews could outmatch most pirate vessels in a straight fight. Pirates relied on speed and cunning. If caught, they used shallow waters and reefs to escape. Some disguised their ships with false flags or altered profiles, hoping to pass as harmless traders. Yet when cornered, pirates could be ferocious. There are records of desperate last stands, where pirates fought to the death rather than be captured and hanged. Long voyages and expeditions. Despite their reputation for coastal raiding, many pirate ships ranged far beyond the Caribbean. Some sailed north to the American colonies, striking at ports in the Carolinas or New England. Others crossed the Atlantic to Africa, preying on slave ships or raiding coastal outposts. The most ambitious expeditions took them into the Indian Ocean, where trade routes were even richer. Captains like William Kidd and Henry Every became legends for their global voyages, hunting treasure-laden ships from India and Arabia. Their ships were tested against storms, long shortages, and hostile fleets, but they pressed onward in search of fortune. Daily rhythm of piracy at sea. Between raids, life aboard was a constant cycle of maintenance and watchfulness. Sails needed constant repair, decks had to be scrubbed, and the ship's guns had to be kept ready for sudden combat. Crews trained in boarding drills, practiced with pistols and cutlasses, and sang shanties to keep rhythm at the oars when the wind failed. Voyages were often uncertain. Food ran short, water spoiled, and disease spread quickly. Yet the pirate ship offered something no naval or merchant vessel could, a measure of freedom. Each man had a vote in decisions, a share in the loot, and a chance, however fleeting, at wealth and independence. Blackbeard and Queen Anne's Revenge. Perhaps no ship is more closely linked with piracy than Queen Anne's Revenge, the flagship of Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard. Originally a French slave ship named La Concorde, she was captured by Blackbeard in 1717 and quickly transformed into one of the most feared vessels in the Caribbean. Refitted with up to 40 cannon, she became a floating fortress. With a menacing captain at the helm, his beard braided with slow-burning fuses, his presence larger than life. Queen Anne's Revenge spread terror across the Atlantic. She blockaded Charleston, South Carolina, holding the entire city hostage until medicine was delivered. For nearly a year, she was the scourge of merchants and colonists alike. Yet her end was sudden. In 1718, while attempting to enter Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina, she ran aground and was abandoned. Blackbeard soon met his fate in battle against Royal Navy forces. The wreck of Queen Anne's Revenge lay hidden for centuries before being rediscovered in the 1990s, adding a tangible reminder of the myths that surrounded her. Bartholomew Roberts and his fleet. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Blackbeard, commanded not just one ship but an entire fleet at the height of his power in the early 18th century. He captured more than 400 vessels during his career, operating across the Caribbean and the Atlantic. His flagship, the Royal Fortune, was a constant presence, though he renamed several captured ships by the same title, each serving as his floating court. Roberts's ships were known for their discipline. Unlike some pirate crews, his were organized and orderly, and his boldness allowed him to strike at targets as far afield as Brazil and West Africa. His death in 1722, during a battle with HMS Swallow, marked one of the great turning points in the decline of the Golden Age of Piracy. Charles Vane, Calico Jack, and Anne Bonny. Not all pirate ships were mighty flagships. Some were small, swift sloops that nonetheless became legendary through the deeds of their captains. Charles Vane, notorious for his cruelty, commanded nimble vessels that allowed him to escape the Royal Navy time and again until mutiny ended his career. Calico Jack Rackham, though less fearsome in battle, became immortal thanks to his companions. Anne Bonny and Mary Red, two of the few recorded female pirates. Their sloop, the Revenge, was modest in size but rich in legend. The image of Anne and Mary fighting fiercely on deck while their male companions cowered below became one of the enduring myths of pirate history. Henry Morgan and the raid on Panama. Before piracy turned outlaw, the line between privateer and pirate was thin. Henry Morgan, perhaps the most famous buccaneer, led fleets of ships in daring assaults on Spanish holdings. His 1671 raid on Panama was among the most audacious, involving dozens of ships and hundreds of men. Though Morgan later became a respected figure in Jamaica, even serving as lieutenant governor, his ships and expeditions remain symbols of buccaneer boldness. The myth of buried treasure. Popular imagination often ties pirate ships to buried treasure. In reality, pirates rarely buried their loot. Gold, silver, and goods were quickly divided and spent. Yet the myth persists, born from tales like those of Captain Kidd, who was rumored to have hidden treasure on distant shores. Pirate ships, with their black flags and sudden disappearances, fueled legends of secret coves and hidden riches that endure to this day. The fall of the pirate ship. By the 1720s and 1730s, the Golden Age of Piracy was drawing to a close. Naval patrols increased, colonial cooperation improved, and pirates found themselves hunted across the Caribbean. Famous ships were destroyed, captured, or abandoned. The execution docks of Port Royal, Nassau, and London filled with former pirate captains, their careers ended by the very powers they had once defied. Yet their ships remained in memory, symbols of rebellion, freedom, and danger. Some wrecks lie at the bottom of Caribbean waters, explored by divers and archaeologists. Others live on in story and song, their sails forever full in the imagination. Pirates in literature. From the moment the Caribbean pirate era ended, their stories began to spread in print. Newspapers in London and colonial cities published sensational accounts of raids, trials, and executions. One of the most influential works was A General History of the Pirates, published in 1724 and attributed to Captain Charles Johnson, possibly a pseudonym. This book immortalized figures like Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Anne Bonny, shaping how generations would picture pirates. Ships featured prominently in these tales. The descriptions of swift sloops, bristling brigantines, and terrifying flagships helped fix the idea of the pirate vessel as both a weapon of war and a stage for adventure. In literature, the pirate ship became as much a character as its captain, embodying danger, freedom, and the lure of the unknown. The romantic image. By the 19th century, writers and poets began to romanticize piracy. Gone were the grim realities of disease, cramped decks, and brutal hangings. Instead, the pirate ship was depicted as a place of freedom, where men, and sometimes women, cast off the chains of society and lived by their own code. This transformation reached its peak with works like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, 1883. Stevenson's fictional Hispaniola gave the world the classic image of the pirate ship, a creaking wooden vessel flying the Jolly Roger, its crew a mix of villains and dreamers. The novel popularized the myth of buried treasure and set the template for nearly every pirate story that followed. Pirates on stage and screen. In the 20th century, pirate ships became staples of film and theater. Swashbuckling adventures with Errol Flynn, the iconic imagery of Captain Blood and the Sea Hawk, and later blockbusters like Pirates of the Caribbean carried the legend of Caribbean pirate ships to millions. Hollywood exaggerated the sails, polished the decks, and gave pirates witty charm and dashing swordplay. The ships themselves became grander, often depicted as towering galleons rather than the more common sloops and brigantines. Yet the spectacle only deepened their place in popular culture. Museums and archaeology. In recent decades, historical research has worked to separate fact from fiction. Archaeologists have uncovered wrecks of pirate vessels, such as Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge off the coast of North Carolina. Artifacts, cannon, anchors, tools, even medical instruments offer a glimpse of life aboard these legendary ships. Museums in places like Nassau, Port Royal, and Kure in Japan, though focused on other naval legends, also devote space to piracy, displaying models and relics that remind visitors of the true scale and style of pirate ships. The enduring symbol. Today, the pirate ship remains one of the most enduring symbols in global culture. It appears on children's toys, theme park rides, video games, and national flags. The black sails and Jolly Roger still evoke rebellion and danger, but also freedom and adventure. The legacy of these ships is twofold. They are reminders of a brutal, lawless time when men risked everything for fortune, and they are symbols of the eternal human desire to break boundaries and live without constraint. Conclusion. The pirate ships of the Caribbean were never the grand galleons of legend. More often, they were humble sloops and brigantines, fast and lightly built, modified to catch prey and escape justice. Yet they became far greater in memory than they ever were in timber and sail. They carried men and women who defied empires, raided kingdoms, and briefly held the seas in their grip. Their service was short, their lives often shorter, but their image has sailed across centuries. In the end, the pirate ship stands as a paradox, both a weapon of violence and a dream of freedom. In the Caribbean sun and storm, they lived and died, but in story and imagination, they sail still.